The morning fog rolled thick across Naval Base Coronado as Lieutenant Commander Kiera Voss stepped through the gate at 5:30. The guard barely glanced at her ID before waving her through, his attention already back on his phone. She didn't mind. Invisibility had become her superpower over 12 years in the Navy, a peculiar advantage she'd learned to weaponize. Her boots made soft sounds against the wet pavement as she walked toward the training compound, the Pacific Ocean, a gray whisper beyond the fence line. She wore the standard Navy working uniform, no trident visible, no indicators except the oak leaves on her collar that most people didn't bother to read. The sky above was the color of steel, promising rain that would never quite arrive, the kind of California morning that felt suspended between night and day. The basic underwater demolition SEAL training class was gathering near the obstacle course, 23 eager faces in fresh camouflage, their eyes bright with the kind of confidence that hadn't yet been beaten out of them by cold water and sand. They were week 1, day 1, hour 1. Still civilians in military clothing, still convinced they knew what awaited them. Kiera watched from a distance as the primary instructors moved among them. Senior Chief Marcus Wade and Master Chief Paul Donnelly, both legends in the community, both men who'd served in theaters from Ramadi to Kandahar. She'd worked with Wade in Syria, knew his teaching style was equal parts brutality and wisdom. Donnelly was newer to her, but his reputation preceded him. A perfectionist who'd once made a trainee perform burpees for 6 hours straight because the kid had smirked during the national anthem. She was here as an observer today, technically. The Naval Special Warfare Command had started an initiative to integrate more female perspectives into training pipelines. Though women still couldn't officially attend Bud-S, her role was consultative, advisory, watching the mechanics of how the Navy broke men down and rebuilt them. But she could already feel the stares beginning, the subtle shift in attention as some of the candidates noticed her approaching. One of them, a tall kid with a Georgia accent and arms like tree trunks, elbowed his buddy and nodded toward her. The buddy grinned. Another candidate, sandy-haired with a face full of freckles, whispered something that made 3 others laugh. The sound carried across the morning air, sharp and dismissive, the kind of laughter that reduced people to punchlines before they'd even opened their mouths. Senior Chief Wade saw her coming and straightened, his weathered face breaking into something almost resembling a smile. Master Chief Donnelly turned, nodded once, professional and curt. But the candidates were still watching, still whispering, and Kiera could read their faces like mission briefs. They thought she was lost. They thought she was someone's wife or girlfriend who'd wandered into the wrong part of the base. One of them, the Georgia kid, actually took a step forward, his expression friendly in that condescending way young men sometimes adopted when they thought they were being helpful. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to direct her toward the Family Services Building or the commissary, somewhere women were expected to be at this hour. The fog swirled around his boots like smoke from a stage effect, and the moment stretched out, pregnant with assumptions. Wade's voice cut through before the kid could form words. "Attention on deck!" The command cracked like a whip, and 23 bodies snapped to parade rest, muscle memory from boot camp overriding confusion. The candidates stood frozen, unsure what was happening, their eyes still tracking Kiera as she walked past them toward the instructors. She moved with the economy of motion that came from thousands of hours of training, her stride neither hurried nor slow, just purposeful. The kind of walk that covered ground without appearing to try. Donnelly gestured toward the group. "Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Commander Voss. She'll be observing your training evolution today." His voice was parade ground flat, giving nothing away, but Kiera caught the microscopic quirk at the corner of his mouth. He was enjoying this. The Georgia kid's face had gone through several shades of red, finally settling on something between sunburn and cardiac arrest. A few of the candidates had the decency to look embarrassed, their eyes dropping to study their boots with sudden fascination. But others, too many others, still wore expressions that hovered between skepticism and amusement. One of them, a compact Latino kid with a shaved head and a tattoo creeping up his neck, actually scoffed under his breath. Not loud, but not quiet enough. The sound was a tiny act of rebellion, a marker thrown down. Wade heard it too, his head swiveled with the precision of a gun turret, eyes locking onto the offender. "Something funny, Candidate Rays." "No, Senior Chief." The response was automatic, but the kid's jaw was set, his shoulders tight. He didn't believe the no he was speaking. "Really? Because I could have sworn I heard you laugh. You think the lieutenant commander is funny. You think this is some kind of joke." Wade's voice had dropped into that dangerous register that experienced service members recognized as the calm before violence. "No, Senior Chief." Just surprised to see Ray's caught himself, but too late. The hole was already dug. Surprised to see what candidate? A woman, an officer, someone who might actually know what the fuck they're doing while you're still trying to figure out which end of the rifle the bullets come out of. The silence that followed was profound. Even the ocean seemed to quiet, waves holding their breath. Kiera remained motionless, her expression neutral, giving away nothing. She'd learned long ago that the best response to doubt was none at all. Let the work speak. Let the record talk. Let the doubters marinate in their assumptions until reality came to collect the debt. Donnelly stepped forward, his bulk impressive even among men selected for physical prowess. "Drop, all of you, push-up position, now." 23 bodies hit the wet sand and gravel without hesitation, arms shaking as they held the plank position. Ray's face was pressed toward the ground, his neck corded with effort and humiliation. The other candidates breathed in sharp hisses, already feeling the burn, already regretting morning wake-up calls and decisions to join the Navy instead of the Air Force or Marines or literally anywhere else. Wade circled them slowly, his boots crunching gravel. "You know what your first mistake was this morning. Your first of many, I'm sure, but let's start there. Anybody want to guess?" Silence, except for the growing sounds of strain from muscles holding body weight suspended. "Your first mistake," Wade continued, his voice almost conversational now, "was assuming you knew a goddamn thing about anything. Was assuming that what someone looks like tells you what they can do. Was assuming that the uniform doesn't mean the exact same thing on every person who earns the right to wear it." Kiera watched the scene unfold with the detachment of someone who'd witnessed this particular play too many times to count. Different stage, different actors, same script. Donnelly crouched near the front of the formation, near the Georgia kid whose helpful expression had started this cascade. "You see those oak leaves on the lieutenant commander's collar, Candidate Barnes. You know what those mean." "Lieutenant Commander rank, Master Chief." Barnes' voice was strained, his arms beginning to tremble visibly. "That's right. And do you know how many years of service it typically takes to make 04 in the Navy?" 10 to 12 years, Master Chief." "Good, you can read. So that means the lieutenant commander has been serving her country since before some of you were old enough to drive, which means she's forgotten more about the Navy than you've ever known. And yet somehow, you thought she needed your help finding her way around a military installation." Donnelly stood, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. The arrogance is truly breathtaking. Wade had completed his circle, returning to stand beside Kiera. He glanced at her, a question in his eyes that only she could read. She gave the smallest nod, granting permission for what came next. "Here's what's going to happen," Wade announced, his voice carrying across the training area. "You're going to hold that position until I get tired of looking at you. And while you're down there, contemplating your life choices, I'm going to tell you a story. A story about a naval officer who went through Bud S before most of you hit puberty, back when the program was still exclusively testing limits." One of the candidates, a stocky kid with a Midwest accent, couldn't contain himself. "Women can't go through Bud S, Senior Chief." The words came out between gasps for air, respect protocols forgotten in the strain of the moment. The smile that crossed Wade's face was not friendly. "Can't. or aren't officially allowed to. There's a difference, Candidate Morrison. A big one. See, what you don't know, what you couldn't know because you just got here and you don't know shit is that the lieutenant commander standing here didn't go through the traditional pipeline. She went through something else entirely. Something that made Bud S look like summer camp. Kiera felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the old memories rising like dark water. Wade was going there, pulling back the curtain on things she preferred to keep behind closed doors. But this was his show, his training evolution, and she trusted his judgment even when it made her uncomfortable. The candidates needed to understand, not for her sake but for theirs. Donnelly picked up the thread. Some of you might be aware that Naval Special Warfare has been running experimental integration programs for years, testing whether women could meet the standards, whether the standards themselves were valid, whether our assumptions about human capability were based on science or just tradition and bias. The lieutenant commander was part of one such program. Not the first, but close. Back in 2015, when she was just a lieutenant. The candidates were listening now, really listening, their discomfort with the physical position temporarily forgotten as curiosity overrode pain. Even Reyes had lifted his head slightly, his earlier skepticism replaced by something harder to define. Wade's voice took on a different quality, the tone of a man recounting history rather than delivering a punishment. She went through a modified Bud S course that was, by all accounts, harder than the standard pipeline. Had to be harder because if it wasn't, people like you would question the validity. She did Hell Week in winter, in water 3 degrees colder than normal. She carried the boats, swam the distances, ran the obstacle courses, completed the dive phases. All while people watched, waiting for failure, hopping for it in some cases, because failure would confirm their worldview. The sky had begun to lighten incrementally, the fog thinning to reveal patches of pale blue. Gulls called in the distance, their cries sharp and mocking. Kiera's hands were clasped behind her back, her posture relaxed despite the intensity of the moment. She'd learned to dissociate from stories about herself, to treat them as narratives about someone else, a character in a film she'd watched but hadn't starred in. She finished second in her class, Donnelly said quietly. Second out of 47 candidates who started. Only 13 made it through. She was number 2. One of the candidates, a red-haired kid with an Alabama accent named Curtis, whispered, "Holy shit." Yeah, Wade agreed. Holy shit indeed. But here's the thing that really matters. After Bud S, she didn't go to a desk job. She didn't disappear into administrative work or become a poster child for diversity initiatives. She went to a SEAL team. She deployed to Syria, to Iraq, to Niger. She kicked in doors at dark 30 with the rest of the boys, cleared rooms, called in airstrikes, pulled wounded teammates to cover. She did the job, the actual job, for 8 years before they promoted her and stuck her in a training role, because that's what the Navy does with senior officers whether you like it or not. The candidates were struggling now, arms shaking violently, bodies beginning to sag despite mental commands to hold position. Sweat darkened their uniforms despite the cool morning air. But none of them had dropped, none of them had quit, and Kiera recognized the stubbornness in that. They were wrong, but they weren't weak. That counted for something. Donnelly walked behind the formation, his voice almost gentle now. Her call sign is Wraith, earned during a mission in Mosul when she spent 43 hours alone in an enemy-controlled building, spotting targets for sniper teams while insurgents searched floor by floor below her position. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, didn't eat or drink, just waited and called targets until the objective was secure. One of the insurgents came within 6 feet of her hide spot and never knew she was there. Ghost-like Wraith. Kiera remembered that mission with perfect clarity despite wanting to forget it. The smell of decay and cordite, the sounds of Arabic voices growing closer then receding, the way her body had cramped and screamed for movement while her mind held it perfectly still. The profound loneliness of being surrounded by enemies, the knowledge that one mistake, one sneeze or cough or moment of weakness would end in capture and worse. But also the strange piece of it, the purity of purpose, the simplicity of survive and accomplish mission. Reduce everything to those two imperatives and let all other concerns fall away. Wade was still talking. She has 3 bronze stars, one with V device for valor in combat, 2 purple hearts from wounds sustained while doing the job you're all so eager to prove you can handle. She's been shot twice, blown up once, and still came back to the teams because this is what she does. This is who she is. A warrior. A SEAL in everything but official designation. The first candidate dropped. Morrison, the Midwest kid who'd questioned whether women could attend Bud S. His arms had finally given out, and he collapsed face first into the gravel, breathing hard. He looked devastated, humiliated by the physical failure. "Recover," Donnelly commanded, and Morrison pushed himself up to kneeling, his face flushed with exertion and shame. One by one, the other candidates were also told to recover, until they all knelt in a rough formation, looking up at the instructors and at Kiera with expressions that had transformed entirely from the laughter and dismissal of 30 minutes earlier. Wade let the silence build before continuing. "So when you see the lieutenant commander, when you see any officer or enlisted person on this base, you don't see gender or race or what your limited fucking experience tells you they should or shouldn't be capable of. You see the uniform. You see the rank. You see the years of service. And you show respect until they prove they don't deserve it. The Navy doesn't hand out tridents or promotions or combat decorations like party favors. Every single person who wears these uniforms earned their place. Remember that." Kiera finally spoke, her voice calm and clear in the morning air. "On your feet, candidates." They scrambled up, snapping to attention with a precision born from fear of making another mistake. She walked slowly in front of the formation, making eye contact with each of them in turn. "Some of you will make it through this training. Most of you won't. That's just statistics. But those of you who do make it will eventually find yourselves on a team, deployed somewhere dangerous, relying on the people beside you. And when that happens, you'll need to trust them completely, regardless of what they look like or where they came from or whether they fit your mental image of what a warrior should be. Because the enemy doesn't care about your prejudices or assumptions. They only care about killing you and accomplishing their objectives. Your teammates' capability is measured in actions, not appearances. Learn that now or learn it the hard way later. I recommend the former." She stopped in front of Reyes, the kid who'd scoffed. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably barely 21, his tattoo still fresh enough that the edges were sharp. "What's your name, candidate?" "Reyes, ma'am, Julian Reyes." "Where are you from, Reyes?" "El Paso, ma'am, Texas." "Family military?" "Yes, ma'am, Dad was Army, 2 tour in Afghanistan." Kiera nodded. "He teach you to judge books by their covers, or did you pick that up somewhere else?" Reyes's face went through several emotions before settling on genuine contrition. "No, ma'am, that was all me. I apologize, I was wrong." "You were," Kiera agreed. "But you're here and you're still standing, so you get the chance to learn better. Use it." "Yes, ma'am." She addressed the full formation again. "I'm not here to make your life harder. I'm here to observe, to learn how the training pipeline works now, to possibly offer insights that might improve the process. You won't see me much. I'll be in the background, taking notes, talking to instructors, but remember this morning. Remember that assumptions are dangerous, that respect is earned but should be given until proven otherwise, and that the Navy is bigger and more diverse than whatever narrow slice of it you've experienced so far." The candidates stood silent, chastened, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. The Georgia kid, Barnes, looked like he wanted to sink into the earth. Even the ones who hadn't directly participated in the mockery seemed to understand they'd been complicit through silence. Wade checked his watch. "We're now 47 minutes behind schedule, which means you've already failed your first evolution of the day. Congratulations. Hit the surf. Full uniform. When you come back, we'll start actual training. Maybe, if I feel like it, move." They ran toward the ocean, a disorganized cluster of bodies splashing into the cold Pacific water, their shouts of shock and discomfort carrying back on the wind. Kiera watched them go, remembering her own hell week, her own moments of doubt and breakthrough, the terrible beauty of discovering capabilities you didn't know you possessed. Donnelly stood beside her, arms crossed over his broad chest. Think they learned the lesson? Some of them did, Kiera replied. The others will learn it eventually or they'll wash out. Either way, problem solved. Wade joined them, his expression thoughtful. You didn't have to let me tell your story like that. I know you prefer to keep it quiet. No, you were right to do it. They needed context. Without context, they just see surface details and fill in the blanks with stereotypes. Better they know the truth now than stumble across it later and feel even more foolish. She paused, watching the candidates thrashing in the waves, their uniforms soaked through, their faces shocked by the cold. Though I notice you left out the parts about me crying during Hell Week and puking my guts out during pool comp. Wade grinned. Everyone cries during Hell Week. Everyone pukes during pool comp. That's not a story, that's just Tuesday. The fog had fully lifted now, revealing a clear morning sky washed clean by the departed moisture. The base was coming to life around them, other training evolutions beginning, personnel moving between buildings, the morning routine of military life grinding into gear. Kiera felt the familiar weight of being different, of being the example whether she wanted to be or not, of knowing that her successes and failures carried implications beyond herself. But she also felt something else, a quiet satisfaction at seeing those candidates' certainty shattered, their worldview expanded forcibly whether they liked it or not because she enjoyed their discomfort, but because discomfort preceded growth. She'd learned that truth 1,000 times over in her career, and these kids were just beginning their own education in that particular subject. Same time tomorrow, Donnelly asked. Same time, Kiera confirmed. Though maybe we can skip the morning humiliation ritual and get straight to the training observations. Where's the fun in that? Wade countered, but his smile was warm. Seriously, though, it's good to have you here. The program needs more perspectives, more voices. Too many of us old guys teaching the same lessons the same way. Fresh eyes help. Kiera appreciated the sentiment, even as she doubted her eyes were particularly fresh after 12 years in the community. But she understood what he meant. Different didn't necessarily mean new, just additive. Another angle on old problems, another approach to eternal questions about how to build warriors from raw civilian material. The candidates were emerging from the surf now, stumbling back up the beach toward the training area, their bodies shaking from cold, their faces set in grim determination. They looked miserable and small and utterly unprepared for what awaited them. But they also looked committed, at least in this moment, to pushing through discomfort towards something larger than themselves. Kiera recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once, a lifetime ago, when she'd been the one stumbling out of cold water toward instructors who viewed her as an experiment, a test case, a political statement rather than simply another candidate. She'd proven herself through repetition and excellence, through refusing to quit when quitting would have been easy and even understandable. She'd made it through by treating every evolution as the only evolution that mattered, every moment as a test that could be passed or failed, but never escaped. These candidates would need to learn the same lesson. Some would, many wouldn't. That was the nature of selection, it selected. Not everyone who wanted to be a SEAL got to be one. Most didn't. The standards were high because the job was impossible, and impossible jobs required impossible people, or at least people willing to attempt impossible things and occasionally succeed. As the candidates formed up again, dripping and shivering in the morning air, Kiera stepped back into her observer role. She pulled out a small notebook and pen, ready to document the training evolution, to note what worked and what didn't, to look for innovations or inefficiencies that could be addressed. This was her job now, the assignment she'd been given after 12 years of kicking doors and hunting bad guys. It wasn't the job she would have chosen, but it was the job she had. And she would do it well because that was the only way she knew how to operate. The candidates stood at attention, waiting for instructions, their earlier levity completely absent. They had been transformed by cold water and harsh truths, at least temporarily. Whether the transformation would stick remained to be seen. But for now, in this moment, they were students who had just learned that their teachers knew things they didn't, that the world was more complex than their assumptions allowed, that respect and humility were survival skills in environments where ego could get you killed. Wade began the actual training brief, his voice professional and clear, outlining the day's evolutions and performance standards. The candidates listened with an intensity they hadn't shown earlier, taking mental notes, trying to prepare for challenges they couldn't fully anticipate. Kiera listened too, half her attention on Wade's words and half on the candidates' reactions, looking for the tells that separated future seals from future washouts. It was in the eyes, she'd learned. The ones who would make it had a certain quality in their gaze, a willingness to suffer that went beyond physical toughness into something almost spiritual. They looked at impossible challenges not with fear or bravado, but with a kind of curious determination, as if the difficulty itself was interesting rather than deterrent. She saw that quality in maybe 4 or 5 of these candidates. The others might develop it, might find it within themselves when pushed hard enough, or they might not. Time would tell. The sun broke fully over the horizon, casting long shadows across the training compound. Another day beginning, another group of hopefuls starting the journey toward becoming something more than they currently were. Kiera had walked this path. Wade had walked it. Donnelly had walked it. Thousands of men had walked it over decades of war and peace. And now these 23 were walking it, their boots making the same sounds on the same gravel, their bodies enduring the same tests, their minds confronting the same questions about capability and endurance and whether they had what it took. She made a note in her notebook. First impressions matter less than second chances. Give candidates opportunity to correct course after mistakes. It was a small observation, but potentially important. The military ran on second chances, on the idea that error could be corrected through education and repetition. These candidates had made a mistake this morning, but they'd also been given the chance to understand and adjust. That grace was essential to building teams that could function under stress. The evolution began in earnest, and Kiera settled in to watch, a silent observer in a system she'd once been utterly immersed in. The morning stretched ahead, full of push-ups and log carries and sprints through soft sand that would leave muscles screaming. The candidates would suffer, would doubt, would question every decision that led them to this beach at this moment. But they would also discover things about themselves, would find reserves they didn't know existed, would build bonds with their classmates that could last lifetimes. This was how warriors were made, not through inspiration or ideology, but through systematic discomfort applied with precision until the person either broke or became unbreakable. It was brutal and necessary and deeply human, this process of transformation through trial. And Kiera was honored to witness it again, even from the sidelines, even as an observer rather than a participant. Some journeys were worth watching, worth documenting, worth remembering. The candidates ran toward the obstacle course, and their new day truly began.